Site 265 fully online, and in this video I'm going to be talking about how to write the discussion section. So if you go onto the assignments tab in Blackboard, you have all the different sections, the walkthroughs, both the written walkthrough and the video walkthrough which you're watching, and this is for the discussion. But in order to talk about the discussion, I want to first point out the results section. The results section is posted here under results, and I've analyzed the data for you because that could be a little bit tricky, especially if you're not familiar with statistics. So I've analyzed the data, and we're testing the 5 hypotheses that were laid out in the introduction section. So what are those 5 hypotheses? Let's look at the introduction again. And our 5 hypotheses were here in paragraph 8. Empathy will be positively correlated with mask wearing. People receiving COVID-19 vaccine will be more empathic than those not receiving the vaccine. Health anxiety will be positively correlated with fear of future pandemics. People who have lost friends and family to COVID will have higher levels of depression and generalized anxiety. And finally, attachment anxiety will be positively correlated with a desire for family and friends to be vaccinated. So these are your 5 hypotheses that we laid out in the study based on the survey data. And we're testing all 5 of those, and I've done that statistically for you, and I'm going to go through the results right now. So let's look at the results of those hypotheses. So I've attached it here under results. So here are our results. For the first hypothesis, there was no correlation between empathy and mask wearing. The second hypothesis, there was no difference in empathy between people receiving the COVID vaccine and those not receiving the COVID vaccine, since all participants received the vaccine. So originally this hypothesis was developed to look at people that had gotten the vaccine and those who had not gotten the vaccine and look at differences in empathy. The problem in this current study with the data collected was that everybody in the course received the vaccine, and partly the reason why that happened, I think, is because you needed to receive the vaccine to be on campus. So even though it's an online course, everyone still received the vaccine. Because if you're taking any kind of class on campus, you have to receive the vaccine. So since everyone received the vaccine, there wasn't really anything to test here. If it was done in the general population, you would see a lot of people without the vaccine, because 35% of all U.S. residents did not receive any vaccine, about 30%. The next hypothesis, there was no correlation between health anxiety and fear of future pandemics. And I've written out the correlation here, 0.191 is a small correlation. P is 0.496. That's not significant because it's greater than 0.05. So statistically, this could occur by chance, or this can occur if the null is true about half the time, which basically means that we can't reject the null hypothesis here. So that hypothesis wasn't supported. So far, we're 0 for 3 here. Was there a difference in generalized anxiety and depression? There was no difference in generalized anxiety between those who have lost family and friends and those who have not lost family and friends. There was no real difference there at all. P is 0.932. There was also no difference in depression between those who have lost family and friends and those who have not. P is 0.535. So we're 0 for 4 on our hypotheses. And the last one, there was a moderate correlation between attachment anxiety and the desire of family or friends to be vaccinated. So this is kind of a borderline one, 0.084. That is greater than 0.05. However, the correlation is large, 0.460. So this is probably going to be significant in the general population, even though it's technically borderline here. And the reason being is we have a very small sample. So only 15 people took the survey out of 2 classes of 30 people. So half the participants didn't even take the survey, which was a requirement for the course. Why? I have no idea. People just haven't completed the work. There's only 15 out of 30 people enrolled that actually completed the survey. That's a really small sample. In a normal psychological study, we would have, 100, 200, maybe more. And with a correlation of 0.460, that larger sample would drive the significance down to become significant. So even though this is borderline, I'm still considering it a, supporting the hypothesis. So it's 1 out of 5. And a lot of the other ones, they're not really close, although our sample size is very small. That's a major limitation of the study. What does it mean in terms of attachment anxiety and desire of family and friends to be vaccinated? Well, if you're high on attachment anxiety, you are kind of clingy. So you cling to your romantic partners. You're very close to family and friends. You don't kind of give them their space. So it's a clingy type of behavior. And if you're really concerned about your romantic partners, family, and friends, and you tend to cling to them, you're also probably worried about them getting sick. And so that makes sense that there's a positive correlation there between, this sort of clingy nature and the desire for people to be vaccinated, especially close people to you. So those are our results. Are they great results? No, but our sample size is very small, 15, and we're 1 of 5, and that's pretty much what I generally average when I run this study in this class. With COVID the last couple of years, we're sort of nearing the end of COVID, so it's probably not going to be as relevant moving forward, but we're still in like the latter stages of COVID, the pandemic idea of COVID. And eventually it will become endemic. It'll become like another version of the flu, and we'll have probably vaccines forever for it. But the general public is kind of checked out at this point in terms of they've been vaccinated, people have gotten boosters. People are kind of tired of burnt out worrying about it. So I think you see some of that in the data collected, even though there's only 15 people in this data set. You'd probably see it in a national data set as well. Sort of the COVID burnout and just, I don't care anymore. I just want to get on with things. Things are going to go back to normal. Sick and tired of dealing with it. And I think that's what you see here in terms of the fear of future pandemics and the empathy in mask wearing. People are just kind of over it. They're not even wearing masks much anymore, even indoors. I still wear a mask because I've gotten COVID multiple times and it wasn't very pleasant, but I'm one of the rare exceptions when I go out these days to see people wearing masks. So that's kind of why the results are not as wonderful as I would have liked. However, if I combine this semester's data with previous semester's data, I have a bigger data set. And there's some interesting results when I combine all the data into a larger sample. And I may be doing that at a later point. So let's talk about how to write, based on these results, how to write the discussion. So let's go back here and we want to go through the discussion walkthrough. Right here, how to write discussion section. So it's 4 paragraphs. That's it. Probably a little bit over a page. Double spaced. So you're going to write the word discussion in regular font, non-bold, non-italic, center it. Paragraph 1, you're going to restate your hypotheses. So go back to the introduction, that last paragraph of the introduction I just showed you, and you're going to restate those hypotheses. And after you state the hypothesis, you're going to state whether or not you supported or failed to support your hypothesis without using statistical terms. So the results contain the statistics. You're not going to use that. So you're going to say it was hypothesized there'd be a positive correlation between mask wearing and empathy. The results of the study indicate that there was no positive correlation between mask wearing and empathy. That's it. You're just restating the results of each hypothesis. So you state each hypothesis. Right after you state it, State the result of that hypothesis. And there's 5 of them, so there should be 5 statements of the hypothesis and 5 sentences talking about whether the results were supported or not supported. And only one was supported, which was uh, the last one where we looked at attachment anxiety correlation between attachment anxiety and the wanting friends and families to be vaccinated. That's it. Everything else was not significant. So that paragraph is very easy because it's already done for you. All you have to do is restate it. Paragraph 2. How do your findings relate to past research, especially the research discussed in the introduction? So go back to the introduction where you summarize studies based on each of the 5 hypotheses tested and talk about the current results from this study, the class study, compared to what has happened previously, which you have stated. Was it similar or different from previous research? You want to talk about all 5 hypotheses here. So hypothesis 1 on empathy and mask wearing, we found no correlation in the study. Compare that to previous research where they probably did find correlations. So you just want to make sure you state whether it's similar or different from previous research. So the current study was different from the study carried out by Smith and Kim, 2021, or whatever the result is. Cite those studies. Make sure you cite those previous studies in paragraph 2. It's just a comparison. The current results of the study we did, the class study, the survey, compared to the previous research that you've hopefully put in the introduction. That's paragraph 2. Make sure you talk about all 5 hypotheses. Paragraph 3, if you fail to support your hypotheses, explain why. So we failed 4 times. So there's a lot of reasons why. Limitations of the study are the reasons why we failed to support our hypotheses. So in paragraph 3, you're going to be talking about these limitations. The biggest limitation is small sample size. We had a sample size of 15. It's very difficult to run a study with such a small sample size. It's underpowered. There's not enough power to detect a significant difference. And that could be one of the reasons why our hypothesis wasn't supported. Other reasons could include the fact that our study is composed primarily of younger 20s, maybe to early 30s, undergraduate students in New York City. So is New York City like the general population? If you look at the entire country, New York City's probably not like that because New York City had a very much higher compliance rate in terms of COVID, getting vaccinations, people wearing masks more, much higher in New York City than it was in the rest of the population. So that's another limitation of the study. It's not a diverse sample, it's just New York City. Another limitation, like we showed in hypothesis 2, everybody was vaccinated, so you couldn't test that hypothesis. That's a limitation, that every single person in the sample is vaccinated. So there's a lot of different limitations here. Small sample size is the biggest one. Age of the participants, the location of the study, all that stuff. You might even want to consider a limitation to be the fact that we're nearing the end of the pandemic and people are not as concerned with pandemic safety standards. So those are limitations. You also want to talk about internal and external validity. Internal validity is, can you draw cause and effect conclusions based on the study? Since our study was correlational, we cannot draw cause and effect conclusions. Survey is correlational data. We can't draw cause and effect. You need a true experiment to draw cause and effect conclusions. Since we can't draw cause and effect conclusions, the internal validity of the study is low. External validity refers to how much can you generalize from the sample to the population. Well, once again, this is a problem. Our sample size is really small, 15, and the population is large, and the population includes people that are not New Yorkers and not 20 years of age. So if we're drawing conclusions about the general population, our external validity would be low as well. Because our sample is just not diverse, it's not big enough. And it's not a random sample. You guys learned about a random sample where every member of the population has an equal chance of being in the sample. That's not the case here because you're in a research class and you were required to do the survey. So there's nothing random about the sample at all, which limits our external validity. So there are problems for both internal and external validity. And then the last paragraph, what are the real world implications of the study? So what does it tell you, especially with regard to the significant finding? So the correlation between attachment anxiety and the desire for family and friends to be vaccinated and taking COVID seriously. What does that tell us? I mean, that can tell us a lot. If people tend to be high on the attachment anxiety scale or dimension, they're suffering a great deal during the pandemic because they're so worried about their significant other, their family, their close friends getting sick. And they really want their family, friends, and partners to take as many precautions as possible. But this excess anxiety is not good for them. So those are some real world implications. I mean, these people are going to suffer more, probably have diagnosed anxiety disorders, maybe depression, but a massive amount of stress just from the pure worrying all the time. Worrying. What's going to happen? There was a lot of that during the pandemic. There was no way to tell who was going to get sick, who wasn't going to get sick. Family members got sick, some recovered, some didn't. But if you were very close to them and clingy and worried about them leaving, leaving includes dying. It's a more permanent version of leaving you. And if you're worried about your partner getting sick, especially if they had pre-existing conditions or health issues or lived with elderly family members, it was not a good time. Especially if you were very close to people and you worried about them. So those are some of the real world implications. Other real world implications are that we're not seeing many results here because the sample is small, but also people are burned out. People are tired. I think that's the biggest take-home point. People are just tired of COVID. So that's something you'd want to consider in paragraph 4. There's a lot of burnout. COVID burnout, fatigue, pandemic fatigue. It's year 3. People are just sick of it. How would you address the limitations of the study if you were conducting future research? This is also in paragraph 4. Obviously, increase sample size, increase the diversity of the sample, find people that are not vaccinated, things like that, right? There's a lot of ways to address these limitations, but getting a bigger sample is probably the most important. So it's 4 paragraphs, discussion, not hard to write. I've given you tons and tons of hints. So if you're watching the video, you're getting a lot from me. If you're not watching the video, then you obviously you're not getting anything from me, and that seems to be a trend here lately that people are not watching the videos and they're just writing what they want to write. So don't do that. Make sure you're following the structure I give you, and I'm giving you some ideas. If you come up with other ideas, of course, include your ideas in the discussion section. I look forward to reading them, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me, reach out. I'll be happy to help you. So bye for now. See you soon with the title, abstracts, and reference section.